All right, welcome to the Productivity Show, a podcast where we believe you can get the important things done without sacrificing your health, family, and things that matter to you. My name is Brooks from Agent Efficiency, where we help people become more productive at work and in life. And in this episode, I'm really excited to welcome Edward Sullivan, who's been coaching and advising startup founders, Fortune 10 executives, and heads of state. I'm sure there's some stories there for over 15 years. His client include executives from Google, Salesforce, Slack, dozens of other fast growth companies. Edward is the CEO and president of Velocity, which is an executive coaching consultancy. And most importantly for today, Edward's also the co-author with John Baird of a new book called Leading with Heart: 5 Conversations that Unlock Creativity, Purpose, and Results. So welcome, Edward. How's it going?
Doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. We were just talking about surfing near New York City, but that's not what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to get into a lot in this episode. The main theme I kind of want to explore is how do we help others get their best results, which of course will indirectly help us. So much productivity advice involves personal productivity. That's a lot of what we talk about on the show, but let's face it, so much of what we do relies on other people, and helping others can only help ourselves, obviously. But even if you're not an executive or a capital L leader, there's going to be something in this episode that's for you. We'll make sure to cover all those bases. So Edward, maybe you can talk a little, I gave your bio at the start, but maybe you can talk a little bit about yourself, what sorts of things you do. And one thing I'm really curious about is what led you to this executive coaching career in the first place? Like, how does one become an executive coach?
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Brooks. It's so good to be here. And I appreciate the question. I do get asked a lot, how did you end up being an executive coach? And the simple answer is someone asked me to coach them. That is really how it all began. I did a mid-career business degree at the Wharton School at University of Pennsylvania. And about halfway through our studies, my classmates started asking me to coach them, which I thought was kind of odd. They were professors, they were administrators, and we were just classmates. But I think there was some combination of my way of interacting with people and also my background that led people to believe that I might be a really good coach for them. So one day, one of my classmates reached across the lunch table and said, you've gotten, a number of people elected to president around the world, and you have all this experience in business. Would you be my executive coach? Because you can probably help me get a promotion at BCG. And it seemed a little silly at first. I agreed to meet with her as friends, and then she insisted on making it formal and paying me. And that was about 8 years ago. And the snowball just started spinning. And now I run Velocity.
Perfect. Now, one thing I was curious about, you and your co-author, John, you guys have worked with some really high-level people. We talked about heads of state. We talked about people like Google, Slack, Salesforce, and stuff like that. What do you think it is about people who make it to that high level, like that extreme executive level, that makes them different, if anything? Maybe the answer is nothing, but it makes them different from, say, someone who is just like a mid-level manager or maybe runs a smaller organization. Like, is there something that different about those people that reach those really high levels? Do you think, or is it just luck?
We have a theory. And John and I wrote this book because we were asking that same exact question. What makes these people special? And we looked back through all of our notes, and I've been at this for close to 15 years when you add in my political career. John's been at it for 25 years. There's about a 30-year age difference between us, the co-authors. And we realized that it's easy to think that what distinguishes really great leaders is their charisma. It might be their ability to present, their ability to inspire, but we actually realize it's their ability to connect, their ability to establish deep emotional and personal connections with the people they work with. And that's what brings out the motivation. That's what brings out the creativity. And this book is really an exploration of the kinds of conversations that they're having to connect with people at that emotional level, at that heart level.
Do you think then that if, say, somebody is listening to this and they're they just don't play at that high level. Like maybe they work at BCG, maybe they work at FedEx or Apple or whatever, but they're probably never going to reach those top levels. Do you think there's like lessons that we can take from those people, even if we never realistically are gonna get there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this book it was originally written for the executives, but as we wrote it, we started realizing that some of our clients come to us and say, I don't know why, but my marriage is getting better after working with you. After learning to have these conversations, my relationship with my kids is getting better. These are basic human skills, right? How we connect with people, how we help people move through the blocks that they have emotionally that are keeping them from feeling creative, keeping them from feeling resourceful. That's useful in every aspect of life.
I think in your line of work, you probably work with some leaders who are amazing, I'm sure. But maybe and I think you probably have a unique insight on this. Maybe you work with people who they're leaders, but perhaps they're not so great. Do you think those type of leaders, do you think they know it? Like if somebody's listening to this and they're thinking to myself, I'm awesome, my team loves me. What would your advice to them be I'm just curious about that. Do you think people who aren't the best leaders, do you think they actually know it?
Part of our process is we do a rigorous 360 every time we get involved with a new client. And we ask everyone in the organization, what's working, what's not working for this individual. And I would say about half the time, people are quite surprised with the feedback. Half the people have no self-awareness. They're completely deluded into thinking that they're just fabulous and that everyone loves them. But really, they've, I think, maybe scared people into silence. A lot of leaders have done that, unfortunately. They externalize their stress. They make people feel triggered into like a fight or flight response. And then the other half have an awareness of these things they need to work on. They come to us because they're fully aware that they're imperfect beings and they want to be better. They realize they never can be perfect, but we're all on that road of learning. So it's really a 50-50 split.
How do you, I remember we're going to get into difficult conversations in a bit, but how do you bring that up? How do you broach that topic if somebody you think is going to be quite surprised? How do you kind of start that conversation?
Yeah, we try to establish rapport and some trust first. And then we also think that these are adults and we can trust them with the truth. So we try not to sugarcoat it too much. Our 360 process can be quite jarring for some people. I've seen grown men cry and grown women cry, right, when they read the feedback. But most people are really grateful, right? Most people are like, wow, I didn't know this, or this gives me new insights. This helps me understand why some of my meetings are too quiet, right? Or why I feel like I need to come up with all the ideas. No one's coming with new ideas because that individual hasn't created the connections. And those connections come from that individual learning how to be vulnerable, having self-awareness, starting where they're at and starting where others are at, and sharing what they're fearful of, sharing what they need to feel resourceful. And that creates a conversation in the room where some of that tension leaves and everyone can kind of relax finally and say, I thought you'd never ask, what I need to show up in this job and feel more resourceful. And we've witnessed some pretty incredible breakthroughs.
Yeah, I guess it's funny that for managers who maybe spend a lot of time complaining about the people on their team, like it is possible that their entire team is a team of deadbeats. Like it is totally possible, but more than likely, it's maybe they need to do some, like you said, 360 soul searching and find out why it is that it seems like so many of their people are not giving them the results that they're wanting.
That's right. That's right. If you think everyone's a problem, 9 times out of 10, you're the problem.
I want to loop back. Yeah, I want to loop back to something you were saying about people who, the people who rule by fear, because in the book you make this distinction between heart-led companies and fear-led companies.
Yeah.
And could you talk a little bit about what each of those mean and what makes one better than the other? I'm going to assume it's heart-led companies, but like what makes one better than the other?
We've all worked in those systems or sat at that dinner table where the table was either ruled by like love and openness or by fear and silence, right? We've all worked in those teams where people were competing for resources, they were getting political, they're jockeying for credit, they're trying to get the boss's attention, curry favor, right? Those are often fear-based cultures. And then there's those other organizations where everyone's open, they're sharing resources. I don't need extra headcount. If anyone else needs them, I'm perfectly happy with the size of my organization. They're not, trying to build up the organization under them to build their ego in any way. They're very different companies, very different teams, and they have very different results. In a heart-based organization, there's a very free flow of information. We hear about problems early, right? People feel safe saying when they smell smoke, right? In a fear-based organization, people don't share information. The boss says, only bring me solutions, don't bring me problems, right? So no one mentions when they see smoke on the horizon, and then the boss is wondering why he's always putting out fires or why she's always putting out fires, right? This is a very clear distinction between those two cultures.
It's so interesting because I used to go through these management development programs, and that's what they would teach you. Like they would teach you, hey, don't go to your boss with a problem unless you have a solution, and
Right.
that's the way, especially if you work in corporate, that's the way you're kind of taught. And so you have this whole, I don't know, maybe it's generation or something of employees who if they don't feel confident that they have the capital T, the solution, they just don't say anything. And I think it's going to take a lot of work. Yeah, it's going to take a lot of work to change that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a
And
great
that
example.
creates more problems. Brooks, if I could count, I can't even count the number of companies we've gone in and talked to, and they said, this whole thing blew up, and it turns out somebody knew about this 18 months ago and didn't say anything. Well, why didn't they say anything? Well, they didn't have the solution, right? If the person had the courage, and if it was a psychologically safe system where they could say, I realize there's this big problem coming, and I don't know how to deal with it, but I think together we could come up with a solution, 9 times out of 10 they can. Because the information to solve that problem is somewhere else in the system.
I want to talk a little bit about coaching, because I think that will kind of, and I mean being a coach within your organization, because I think that a lot of those type of mindset shifts will probably help with this. Because when you're a coach, I'm guessing there's this huge tension between what people are asking you for or think they're asking you for, which is the answer, and what will be most effective, which is kind of like helping them find their answer. I think that's like the root of coaching. But what's the best way to switch from that? If you are somebody who feels like you have to come up with all the answers and answering people's questions, what's the best way to switch from an answering style to more of a coaching leadership style?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you must have gotten some coaching in the past, because you really defined the difference between being like a mentor advisor and being a coach. And ultimately asking great questions is the heart of coaching. And sometimes clients say, well, what's a great question to ask? When someone comes to me with a problem, the first question I ask is, well, what have you tried already? What's not working now, right? And then they might say, oh, XYZ, we did that. And then I might say, well, help me understand your thinking, right? Help me understand. Those are 3 magic words where you get someone going through their mental process. And they might say, well, I guess I kind of made this logical jump from A to Z, and I could have done these intermediate steps. You're like, oh, okay, well, what about trying that? Okay, I'll go do that, right? Often people don't think through their mental process until you invite them to talk it through. And sometimes coaching is as simple as getting people to slow down and think through their own thinking. And 9 times out of 10, they'll see the flaw in logic, or they'll see the step that they missed.
Let's dive into those questions a little bit, because somebody listening to this might be saying, and especially given the title of your book, might be saying like, I want to be a heart-led leader, right? That sounds awesome, but then of course you actually have to do it. It doesn't just happen. I know in the book there's this specific conversations that you recommend to help people kind of get there. Can you talk a little bit about some of those, I think you call them 5 conversations that people can use to help with this?
Yeah, the first conversation we recommend having is the baseline conversation about needs. Because if you're not getting your needs met, you're not going to be able to show up for the other conversations. You're not going to have the energy available. You won't feel safe. You might be triggered into a fear response or something. So we explore 3 different levels of needs that people need to be aware of, and we need to feel okay talking about and asking for, right? We need to get our physical needs met. If you're not eating and sleeping well, if you're not drinking water regularly, you are not going to be operating at 100%. You're not going to be able to have these creative conversations or heart open conversations. You know, like what's the way people say, like, feed me first, then ask me the hard questions later, right? So we talk about physical needs, emotional needs. Are people feeling rewarded? Are they feeling affirmed? Do they feel included? Do they feel a sense of belonging? Do they feel psychologically safe? These are all baseline needs that we universally have to feel safe, to feel resourced, to feel ready to show up for whatever the challenge is that lies ahead. And then we also talk about environmental needs. These are we comfortable in this space? Is the light bothering us? Is there an annoying sound in the background that kind of is triggering our nervous system and making us feel anxiety? Is there someone who's being loud or obnoxious near us that is making us feel unsafe? We have to be able to have conversations at these 3 levels about our needs to feel like we're ready to have the other conversations. And I'll just talk about one more conversation, which is what fears are holding you back. And that's the second conversation in the book. People don't talk about fear in the workplace. They might talk about it at home if they feel safe with a spouse or a loved one, but most people just keep it bottled up inside. We think there's something wrong with us if we're feeling fear, but fear is a very universal human emotion, and we need to work through it. We need to process it. If we don't talk it through and come back to a place of feeling safe with the people we're with, we're constantly going to be triggered into some fear response. 90% of bad behavior and toxic behavior in the workplace is a result of people acting out of fear. They're fighting, they're squabbling, they're holding on to information, they're trying to one up their colleague, all because they're in a fear response. If they were feeling unafraid, fully resourced, they would show up with generosity. They'd show up with curiosity, not with judgment and fear.
The concept of having your needs met, I find really, really interesting. Do you ever find that A players, whatever you define that as, struggle with this? Because in my experience, A players who then move into leadership just sometimes find it incomprehensible that other people don't perform and just get it done like they do. Now, it could just be that they have different needs that they don't recognize. You know, it's kind of like sports where the best players don't always make the best coaches because they just don't understand other people can't do what they can do.
Right.
How do you help people who aren't kind of naturally inclined to think about others and maybe even their own needs? Are there ways you can kind of like help prompt that a little bit?
You know, most really high performing individuals get to a point in their career where they start breaking down. Something isn't working anymore. They're getting injured. They're not thinking as clearly. They're riddled with anxiety. The stress of the expectation and the level of performance is taxing their being, taxing their soul in a sense. And that is happening because they have forgotten to get their needs met. And then they go through this period of healing. You know, so you'll see from NBA players to rock stars, they have these flame outs and then they might come back roaring, stronger than ever before. And when they're in that second phase of that peak of their career, that's when they really, really shine. And it's when they have their systems down. They know exactly what time they need to go to bed. They stop drinking during the week or stop drinking altogether, right? Many artists come back and they're clean, sober. They have surrounded by themselves with certain coaches and therapists, voice coaches. They figured out their system to tune the instrument so they can perform at that level. So early in their career, people will think, I just need to charge through and get it all done. They often end up burning out. And then it's in that second expression of their career when they're like, okay, I think I finally figured out what I need to stay operating at this level. That's when they really, really shine.
So it sounds like it either has to be they either hit a wall, or if they're more self-aware, they can look around, see that others have hit their wall and be like, okay, I want to avoid that in the first place. Interesting. I want to loop back to fear too. That was an interesting one to highlight, because I feel like a lot of people hit a ceiling in their careers, not because they lack abilities necessarily, but because of fear. And I can think back to my career, and I'm sure I have done this too. I wish this book existed like 15 years ago, but they just feel that they can't bring themselves to take that next step, and it might even be subconscious. Do you have advice to help people break through that if they are maybe like looking at next moves in their career, to be able to break through that, where some people have no problem charging through, but other people perhaps do succumb to the fear?
Yeah. Gay Hendricks wrote a book a number of years ago called The Big Leap. And in that book, he explored this idea of the upper limit problem, that most of us have this idea of what the upper limit of our happiness, our success, our money would be. And we start sabotaging, we start holding ourselves back in some way. The fear seeps in and we wonder, do I really deserve this, right? Am I going to be able to show up at this level? And when we have a conscious awareness of the fact that we may start self-sabotaging, we may start holding ourselves back at some point, we can keep an eye out for it. We can be aware, oh, maybe I'm starting to have an upper limit problem now. Maybe I'm starting to hold myself back. What is that? Whose voice is inside my head saying, I don't deserve this promotion? Or whose voice from my past is telling me I'm not good enough? Normally, there was some experience we had in childhood or in adolescence where we started telling ourselves a story where we didn't deserve to succeed. I don't want to like psychoanalyze everyone listening today, but I think it's part of the human condition. We all have that story somewhere inside us, and it's having a conversation back with that and saying, actually, I do deserve this. Actually, I can show up. Actually, every person who has succeeded before has overcome this moment when they lacked the belief in themselves. And everything you want lives on the other side of that.
I'm going to have to check that book out. I will also link it in the show notes. So if you're listening to this, there'll be a link in your podcast app, or you can go to theproductivityshow.com and find the link to that as well. It sounds really, really great. You used a term in the book, which I had never heard before, and that is blind sets. I thought that was a really interesting term. Can you talk a little bit about what blind sets are and how they can be derailing?
Yeah, thank you for that. Really appreciate how deeply you read the book. It's great.
I enjoyed it. It was great.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. So blind sets are a concept that my business partner and I came up with to encapsulate mindsets that blind us to reality in some way. So many of us have these blind sets, which might be living in fantasy, might be living in denial, might be being too skeptical, right? And these blind sets are like a reality distortion field. We think we're much better at something than we are. We think we're worse at something than we really are. We think everyone's out to get us, right? We think the market's about to collapse. There's all these fear-based and delusional stories we tell ourselves that hold us back and keep us from seeing reality. Because being able to have the conversations, the leading with heart conversations, is basing yourself and your experience in pure truth and reality. What's actually going on for me? What's actually going on for you, Brooks? If I'm telling myself a story about our relationship, I may have a fantasy, right? That we have a much better friendship than we actually have. I might be paranoid that actually Brooks is out to get me, right? He's trying to undermine me in some way, which, looking at you, I know you'd never do that. But these are the stories people get into, and they end up walking around unable to see reality. And a lot of negative behavior, fear-based behavior, comes out of those blind sets. So a lot of our work, like the 360 and some of the other assessments we do, is helping people base themselves in reality and truth so they can go forward from there.
The last few questions I want to focus on really helping others, the people around us, either who work for us or just are around us in our life, kind of like help bring them out and bring them up a little bit. And one of the things that I know you talk about is helping people find what their gifts are. And there's kind of like two, in my experience anyway, I'm sure you have others, but there's two kind of general types of people. The ones that you ask them, hey, what do you think your gifts are? And they have like, no problem. They say, I'm great at this, I'm great at that, I'm great at this. But maybe there's another type who kind of struggle to come up with anything that they at least consider a gift. How do we kind of like focus the former on the things that maybe they're truly good at versus what they think they're good at? And then how do we help the latter kind of uncover their gifts that they might not even be aware of?
Yeah, yeah. The people who say like, oh, I'm good at this, I'm good at this, I'm good at that, they're often saying they're good at like specific activities. Like I'm good at baking bread, I'm good at golf, or they're good at roles. Like I'm a good mother, right? I'm a good friend or father, or I'm a good listener. But there's often some underlying gift that maybe ties a couple things together, right? Sometimes people have a gift of empathy. They have a gift for listening for the common thread in some really disparate and strange information, right? They may have a gift for simply remaining calm in crisis, right? So someone who's like, I'm a great EMT. Well, your primary gift is probably, gifts are empathy, you care about people, and you're probably really cool in a crisis. And you express that by being an EMT, right? So we want to look beyond the expressions of the gifts and look for the underlying foundational gift that makes that expression come alive. And for the people who have a hard time identifying their gifts, they have probably been holding themselves back in many ways throughout their life, right? They've been telling themselves a story that they don't have a whole lot of value. And sometimes it takes a reflection from the outside to help us understand what our gifts are. So we often encourage our clients to ask around, get feedback. What do you think I'm good at? What's my special gift? And you might hear something really special. I was told by a college professor, which I read about in the book, that my core gift was empathy. I had never thought about that in my life. I was 35 years old when he said this, graduate school professor. And it took me by surprise at first. It fit, but it was also like, really, that's it? That's my gift? But it unlocked an entirely new career for me, which is now executive coaching.
Final question is related, but it's similar about purpose.
Yeah.
This is called the Productivity Show. We work in the productivity biz, and anytime you look into any kind of like productivity advice, you're going to hear a lot of stuff about, be aligned with your values, find your purpose, find your why. And some people you talk to might have a purpose, but it kind of like doesn't have anything to do with what the organization does. Like someone might say, oh, my purpose is to help children or something like that. But It's like, well, this is FedEx. So, I don't know why I'm using them as an example over and over again. But, on the other side, some people might say, purpose, I'm just trying to keep my head above water. I'm just trying to, I'm just trying to get out of here at a reasonable time. Do you have some tips for helping people zero in on what their purpose might be if they struggle with that?
Yeah. I mean, I'll start out by saying purpose is not a luxury, right? It's not something that we get to explore later in life when we're done grinding through our career. People say, well, someday I'm going to, open an orphanage. Someday I'm going to start a foundation. The people who are really happiest are those people who are aligning their behavior and their values. They're working on something they really deeply care about. And it's really easy to tell ourselves a story that I don't have the luxury of living my purpose. I've, got mouths to feed. I've got, I just have to, pay rent, right? But if we can get ourselves out of that loop of thinking, which is in itself a blind set, it is a self-limiting belief that I don't have the luxury of doing this. We can often find ways of aligning our gifts, which might be, working with people or working with children, with our purpose. And it's not easy. It often takes an investment. It often takes accepting some period of disruption. It's often not a smooth transition. You don't go from being a FedEx driver to being a high school teacher overnight. You might have to study every night and go to night classes and get your teaching certification. But if that's really your calling, you'll never be happy if you're not doing it. So it might take a couple of years of investment. I realized my calling was coaching. And I went through a multi-year period of learning about coaching, figuring out how the business worked. I eschewed every other kind of work people were throwing at me so I could focus exclusively on this. I went through some financially hard times in the very beginning, but I accepted that I knew it was all going to pay off in the end. And now here we are writing a book and talking to you. Feels pretty good.
There you go. Yeah, I love that tying of gifts and purpose together. I think if you can kind of like make that connection, that's like a superpower, right? Then that's what can really propel you forward. And like you said, it does take, I think also a lot of people, sometimes they will go down this path of figuring this stuff out, and maybe it doesn't work out at first. They're not really sure. And then they just like, oh, well, I guess this stuff is not for me.
Right. It's not going to work out. Yeah. It's not going to work out immediately, and that's one of the things I like to remind people. There is a period of suffering and investment that often precedes great success. Sometimes you need to put in your time. You need to make a little bit less money for a little while in hopes and in the expectation that you'll be much happier, and you'll ultimately be making much more money if you are working in your zone of genius, which is aligning your gifts and your purpose.
All right. So we always end our podcast episodes with something actionable. We like people to have something to do, to take away from the episode that they can put into practice. If you were to have somebody take some sort of action tomorrow, or even better today, what would you like people to do?
I would love everyone listening to this podcast to go out today and have a very courageous conversation from the heart with someone you work with, someone you are trying to build something with, and see if you can deepen your relationship with that person, deepen your connection by really opening up and speaking from the heart, talking about what you need, talking about what fears might be holding you back, talking about how you have some gift you want to express more in the project, and see if that doesn't connect you more, and see if it doesn't lead to better results.
All right. Like I said, I really enjoyed Leading with Heart, 5 conversations that unlock creativity, purpose, and results. Edward, thank you so much for joining the podcast. I actually learned a lot from it. If somebody wants to learn more about you, what you do, where's the best place to go online for that?
Sure. If they're looking for coaching, they can go to velocitycoaching.com. And there's more information about the book at leadingwithheartbook.com.
Perfect. Thanks again, Edward. I really, really appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Brooks. It's been a pleasure.
Yep. And like I said, you can find links to everything at theproductivityshow.com. And thanks again. We will see you next Productive Monday.